Who did you call on the phone right now?
I called my dad.
For 1 hour and 32 minutes on June 18th in Berlin, that phone did nothing. It received no messages anyone was allowed to answer. It recorded no audio. It captured no celebration. It just sat there on grass court soil while the 21-year-old who owned it did something that, statistically, she was not supposed to do. Her name is Alexandra Eala. She is ranked 35th in the world, and across the net from her, on the other side of those 92 minutes, stood the world number 2.
Oh, I can't believe it. I'm in shock right now. So, thank you, everybody.
Eala Rybakina, two-time Grand Slam finalist, 2022 Wimbledon champion, the heavy favorite, the player whose first service game produced 3 aces in a row. The phone in the bag would matter later. It would matter to millions of people. But first, Eala had to win a tennis match that almost nobody outside the Philippines expected her to win. To understand why that phone call broke containment the way it did, you have to understand the 25 days that came before it. On May 26th, Eala walked off court Simone Mathieu at Roland Garros after losing in straight sets to American teenager Iva Jovic, 4-6, 2-6, first round, gone.
It was a good win. Alex is a great player, and I think she loves the grass, having won a title last week.
11 days later, she was hoisting a small trophy in Birmingham, a WTA 125 title, the second of her career, the kind of tournament that doesn't make the highlight package on global tennis shows. And then she flew to Berlin on a wild card to a tournament she had never played before in her life. Round of 64, Donna Vekic, beaten. Round of 32, Bartunkova, beaten. Round of 16, the world number 2. 25 days from a first-round loss in Paris to standing across the net from Eala Rybakina. That is the sentence. The phone call was only the punctuation. Here is what most coverage missed. The story of June 18th was not Eala versus Rybakina as adversaries. There was no villain on that court. Rybakina played. She hit 13 aces. She opened the match at 4-1 in the first set and looked for those first 24 minutes exactly like the player the rankings said she was. She was not careless. She was not disrespectful. She lost because the player on the other side of the net was on that specific afternoon better. The tension in this story is not between two women. It is inside one of them. Because back in March, in Miami, Eala had beaten the world number 2 then too. And in the months that followed, a question began to form quietly in the language tennis people use when they don't yet want to commit to an opinion. Was Miami the real Alex Eala, or was Miami the exception? The Roland Garros loss to Iva Jovic, Jovic ranked outside the top 75 at the time, was the data point that tilted the question toward the second answer. Berlin, then, was not just a tournament. Berlin was a referendum. And Eala arrived at it with a wild-card entry, a 125-level title in her recent past, and a draw that gave her Vekic, then Bartunkova, then the number 2 seed in succession, on a surface she had played professionally less than any other. The question on the line wasn't ranking, it was identity, and the only thing in the world that could answer it was the next ball. The first piece of evidence is the wound nobody rewatches. Roland Garros, May 26th, 4-6, 2-6, in front of a French crowd that had no particular reason to remember her. There was no extended press conference, no preserved primary statement, no long monologue about what went wrong. There was just the score, and then the silence of a player walking off a clay court in late May with a grass season ahead of her and no obvious place to start it. She could have skipped, she could have rested, waited for a bigger wild card, picked a WTA 250 with a friendlier draw. She did the opposite. She entered a 125 in Birmingham. The second piece of evidence is what happened there. On June 7th, after a rain-delayed semifinal that went 2-6, 6-4, 6-3 against Rebecca Masarova, Alex Eala won the Lexus Birmingham Open, her second career WTA 125 trophy, and a result that almost no tennis publication outside the Philippines covered with any real depth. It was a rebuild without a spotlight. 11 days before her phone would be in every Filipino group chat in the world, she was winning a tournament most international tennis fans could not name. The third piece of evidence is the draw that waited for her in Berlin. Round 1. Donna Vekic, the player who would go on to make the Queen's final the ITSE same week. Round 2. Nikola Bartunkova, round of 16. Elena Rybakina, world number 2. This was her tournament debut in Berlin. She had never set foot on that grass for a main draw match before. If you were designing a path for a player rebuilding confidence, you would not draw this one. She got it anyway. The fourth piece of evidence is the first set itself. Rybakina opened with 3 aces in the first game. She built a 4-1 lead. For 24 minutes, it looked like the gap the rankings predicted. And then Eala broke, then held, then broke again. 7-5. The first set against the number 2 player in the world on grass, on debut, taken from 4-1 down by a player who, 23 days earlier, had been knocked out of a Grand Slam in the first round by an American teenager. Take a breath here, because the next part is harder than the first. Leading against Elena Rybakina is not the same as holding the lead against Elena Rybakina. The first set was the swing. The second set was the test. And tennis at this level is rarely decided by the bigger shots. It is decided by the small, almost invisible decisions made when the nervous system starts asking whether the body remembers what it was doing 4 games ago. That is where most upsets, even good ones, quietly come apart. The fifth piece of evidence is 1 game inside that second set. 5-4, Eala serving for the match. 15-30, 1 mistake from being broken back, 1 swing from a tie break she might not survive against a player with 13 aces in her arm. She hit her 4th ace of the match. 2 points later, the match was over. 1 hour and 32 minutes. Across the entire afternoon, the WTA's own recap noted Rybakina committed more than 23 unforced errors, but the number that mattered was that single serve in that single game with the second set on the wire. That is the part of the match nobody clips for social media. That is what nobody saw. The 6th piece of evidence is the phone. Match point landed. Eala walked to her bag. She pulled out the device that had been sitting there for an hour and a half doing nothing. And during her on-court interview, with the stadium microphone still live, she FaceTimed her father, Mike. Her mother, Riza, was on the line too. The audio was simple, almost ordinary. In her own words, in the interview that the WTA's editorial desk published within hours, I called my dad. I said, "Oh my God," and we were just screaming. And my mom was there too. And I don't know, I'm just really happy. There was no speech. There was no statement. There was a 21-year-old ranked 35th in the world doing the most ordinary thing imaginable inside the most extraordinary 90 seconds of her year. And then she said the line that more than any winner or any ace is what this script has been pointing at the entire time. Voice still uneven, smile still incomplete. I am a little foggy right now. I'm still shaking, and I was shaking on match point too. That is the confession. The bravery she would later describe as her highlight word. It was not the absence of fear. It was the management of it. She was shaking when she hit the 4th ace. She was shaking when she shook Rybakina's hand. And she was still shaking when she heard her parents' voices come through the phone. The 7th piece of evidence is the one that closes the door on the word lucky. Less than 24 hours after the Rybakina match, Eala walked back onto the same court for a quarterfinal against Elena Svitolina, former world number 3, number 6 seed at this tournament, one of the most experienced grass court players on the tour. Final score 6-3, 6-4, Eala. That made it her 6th career top 10 win, all of them in straight sets, 4 of them against top 5 opponents. You can call one match an upset. You cannot call 2 consecutive matches against top 10 opposition in straight sets on debut at a tournament anything other than what they are, evidence. The most credible voice on what happened that week is not a pundit. It is the institution itself. From the WTA's own recap published on WTAtennis.com on June 18th, it was the second WTA tour driven by Mercedes-Benz meeting between Eala and Rybakina, and the head-to-head now sits at 1 win apiece. The result also marks Eala's 5th career top 10 victory. all in straight sets, with 4 of those coming against top 5 opponents. That sentence is statistical, not emotional. It is the tour's own scoreboard talking, and the scoreboard does not care about narratives. The scoreboard says, this player has now done this 5 times against this caliber of opponent and never once needed a third set to do it. 24 hours later, with the Svitolina result added, the number became 6. Then Eala supplied the emotional half of the authority herself in the same on-court interview. I think for me returning, and my game in general, a highlight word would be brave. It makes a big difference when I'm able to do that. She did not say talented, she did not say ready, she said brave. It is a word chosen by someone who understands that her own nervous system was the opponent she had to manage, and that the management was a choice she made point by point, not a state she arrived at. This is the part where the story stops being just about one tournament. As of June 15th, Eala was ranked 35th in the world. As of June 19th, with the Rybakina and Svitolina wins added, the live rankings tracked by tennis statisticians had her climbing into territory that, on a Wimbledon entry list, matters for seeding, overtaking players like Siniakova, Vekic, and Raducanu in the projected order. Those projections are not official. The seedings will only be locked when the Wimbledon cutoff is taken. But the direction is unambiguous. Her grass court record in 2026 now reads 8 wins and 1 loss. Inside 3 weeks, she has beaten Donna Vekic, Elena Rybakina, and Elina Svitolina on the surface that historically gives Asian players the steepest learning curve. And by the time you are watching this video, she will be walking into another semifinal, Berlin, June 20th, against Linda Noskova, the only player in this tournament she has previously lost to back in March. That match is happening tonight. This script does not predict its outcome. What it can say is this: regardless of whether Eala wins or loses against Noskova, the body of work that produced the phone call has already been built, and it cannot be unbuilt by one result. The phone call was not the ceiling. The phone call was the door opening. It would be dishonest to tell this story without sitting for a moment in the place where it could have gone the other way. May 26th, Paris, the locker room after a 4-6, 2-6 loss to Iva Jovic. There is no public statement preserved from that afternoon. There is no long quote about what hurt, what she was thinking, what she was going to do next. There is only the score and what came after. The choice to enter a 125 in Birmingham instead of waiting. The choice to fly to Berlin on a wild card to a tournament she had never played. The choice to take the draw the schedule gave her without asking for an easier one. 23 days separated the loss to Jovic from the win over Rybakina. The visible response to the Paris defeat was not a sentence, it was the work that followed it. And that is the answer to the question Berlin was asking. So here is the room she is in now. Literally, on the evening this script publishes, it is a semi-final locker room in Berlin, a room she had not entered before this week. But the bigger room, the one the rankings describe, is the one this story has been quietly building toward the whole time. It is the room of players who have beaten the world number 2 more than once. It is the room of players who have 6 career top 10 wins, all of them in straight sets. It is the room of players whose on-court interview in a tournament they entered on a wild card gets republished by the WTA's own global feed and carried by ESPN and GMA and Olympics.com inside the same news cycle. That is a small room. There are not many people in it. And somewhere in that room, in a black bag with a half-open zipper, on a different court before a different match, is the phone, sitting where it always sits, doing nothing for now, waiting for the next 90 seconds when it will be picked up again. 1 hour and 32 minutes, 25 days. One word: brave. If this story moved you, if you want to follow what happens against Noskova and what happens at Wimbledon and what happens in the rooms after that, subscribe and tell us in the comments which moment of those 25 days stayed with you the most. The match nobody covered in Birmingham, the 4th ace at 5-4, or the phone in the bag doing nothing right up until the 2nd. It did everything.